Little low.
We'll go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you everyone for joining April's Protecting Your Profits webinar with Phil Taylor is joining us today, and he's going to be talking about business planning. We certainly appreciate your time and being with us this afternoon. And I know some places it looks like there's threat of rain, and you would rather be doing some field work, but thank you for joining us today. And of course, this is recorded and it'll be made available if you missed something or want to review anything. So with that, I will just go ahead and I'll introduce Phil and we'll get started. So Phil Taylor has been with AgChoice Farm Credit since the fall of 2012, where he has worked as a farm business consultant covering the AgChoice Western Pennsylvania branch offices in Meadville, Butler, and New Stanton. Phil graduated from the Penn State University with a bachelor's degree in dairy production and has a master's degree from Michigan State University in agricultural economics. He has held positions as extension dairy educator in both Pennsylvania and Michigan. He managed a 100-cow dairy in Ohio for 3 years and worked as a local feed mill sales and service representative in Crawford County. His current responsibilities include helping farms with business planning, succession planning, dairy benchmarking, financial analysis, and financial record keeping. So that is who Phil's joining us today. And just one housekeeping item. If you want to ask a question, we're going to hold questions to the end of Phil's presentation. But if you want to go ahead and type a question into the chat box, don't hesitate to go ahead and do that. And once we get into the Q&A, if you would like to unmute yourself and verbally ask a question, that's certainly okay as well. So with that, Phil, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Zach. I'm assuming you can hear me, and hopefully, Emily, I'm coming through louder and clearer than we were in practice. So welcome everybody to the program today. I first want to thank Zach and the Center for Dairy Excellence for an opportunity to share some thoughts about business planning. I told Zach when he originally asked me back a few months ago if I could do this, I said, well, you're just getting under the wire, because in our household, we're all preparing for a Saturday wedding of our daughter, our only daughter. We had 6 children, 5 boys and 1 girl, so this is a special wedding for us. And that's coming up on Saturday. And I told Zach if this had been Thursday or Friday, he'd have been out of luck. But here we are, and we're going to move forward. I'm assuming you can see the slides that are up and can hear me okay, and we'll get rolling.
Yep. Yeah, I can hear you, Phil, and see the slides. You're good to go.
Okay. So my objectives today, just to build on and follow up the roundtable from last week and review some of the presenters' comments about some aspects of business planning and some of my additional thoughts and ideas based on what they presented. I thought all of the presenters from last week, the Penn State Extension folks and Zach, did a great job of concentrating on some specific areas that we deal with in business planning. And so I'd made some notes as we were going through that last week, and have some comments and things to share. Then I wanted to touch briefly on how do business plans fail. I don't like to concentrate on the glass being half empty or failure, but there are some things that we can keep in mind that can doom our plans and create a situation where we have a lack of success. And on the flip side of that, then talk about some pointers to keys that are to make successful business planning. So some takeaways from last week, and Dr. Lisa Holden kicked things off last week about talking about why would we do a business plan. And I thought one of her reasons for a business plan that spoke to me was it's a roadmap for achievement. You know, that if we're thinking about going somewhere, nowadays we have these things called cell phones, and we have maps and everything, and it can tell us where to turn left and turn right and all those kind of things. And well, there was a day that we didn't have that luxury. And if you were going to take a trip somewhere, you did have to either contact AAA and they would map it out for you, or you had to check your own road maps for how you were going to get somewhere. And the business plan kind of does that. We take the time to say, we're going to start here, we're going to go to this point, go to that point, make these turns and adjustments and all those things. And so I thought the description of a roadmap for achievement nailed it, and why we do business planning, because we are after achievement. The reason we do a business plan in the first place is we're trying to accomplish something. We want to achieve something. I think some reasons for a business plan primarily is that it's for an audience, that we're putting this plan together for a reason, and there's an audience behind that reason. Sometimes that audience is external. It might be your lender. It might be applying for a grant, and those people that are external to your business want some reassurance that you've thought through this uh, project that you're concentrating on, and need to know that there's a plan in place for accomplishing the goal that you're after. I think the biggest reason for a business plan is for our internal audience, and that would be the owner or the management team would benefit from a business plan by doing some annual review of performance. That the business plan was established, and now we're doing an annual review of that business plan to see, did we meet the mark? Did we achieve something with our business plan? And if not, what do we need to make changes in and adjustments? So it's planning for the next year or months or years ahead, however many months or years that might be. Um, and it gets discussions and arguments and fights started. And you may recall, if you were participating in the Dairy Summit last winter, one of our speakers talked about that for chemical reactions to occur, oftentimes there needs to be some heat applied to that reaction. And sometimes on our dairy operations, until we get into some heavy discussions, sometimes arguments, things don't necessarily happen. And so arguments aren't necessarily bad. We just have to work through them and get those discussions going. So I think reasons specifically for business planning are the audience that they're intended for. What a business plan includes. Dr. Holden also included a list of items that I think there were 10 items on her slide, and we could throw in a few more. But the one I wanted to concentrate on, because it was one of her poll questions, is the goals and objectives. Thought it was interesting that the response to the poll question of what is the most difficult or the most challenging part of business planning, and the biggest response was about making goals and objectives, or creating goals and objectives. And so it was, I can't even remember what the other options were. That was the one I chose for the poll question. And I think it's true. In my experience, people really struggle with talking about or thinking about goals and objectives. What is it they want to accomplish? What is it they want to do? And so I tell them sometimes, create an I wish statement. You know, you're walking around the farm doing chores, doing some field work, and you've got time on behind the steering wheel of a tractor. What is it you wish could happen on your farm? And that's maybe where that goal and objective starts. I wish we could find a way to get my brother and I and our cousin involved in the ownership of this operation. Boy, there's a wish. Okay, and it starts out and goes from there to say, let's create a goal. Let's say now, let's let's make that happen in 5 years, something like that. So it's kind of like, I wish we could do a better job of raising heifers. I wish we could do a better job of ensuring that we have an additional month's supply of forages on hand, things like that. So it kind of starts with some I wishes to make those goals and objectives. Dr. Holden also talked about who can help, and I think this is one of the keys, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. But trusted advisors, experienced professionals, and I have always wanted to be a team player. I think it's important that we be team players, and so people that can help ought to be team players, that they're willing to be a part of a team, do their part, contribute their part. And so getting some help to do business plans is critical, in my opinion. And we'll talk about some other reasons a little bit later. What do the advisors bring to the table? Here are a few ideas I have is that they bring an independent observation and attitude to that planning process. We don't have any preconceived notions as advisors coming into that situation, and hopefully no favoritism as far as what family members might see differently and things like that. We can bring experience with other that we've had with other businesses as an advisor comes in and can share an experience with another farm that worked out or didn't work out and bring that to the table. One of the critical ones I think that advisors bring is more focus and less distraction, meaning they're not distracted by the day-to-day operations of the dairy farm. They have the commitment and the time to focus on the items that were identified that needed to be done and follow up with people and getting things done for the team in the business planning aspects. And so they're not they can focus on the project, and that brings a lot to the team. Um, the other thing that advisors from the outside can do is to help gauge input from the whole management team members by allowing and securing that everybody gets a share in input and comments and ideas versus allowing one dominant person to take control of the situation, which may or may not be the best thing for the business plan. And finally, advisors bring some accountability, help to make sure that things are getting done on a timely basis towards the goal of accomplishing something, and keep the team or keep the people involved accountable to being to meetings and informing people of what's happening and what's going on. And the farm often doesn't have a person or an employee that has that available time or that accountability that they can bring. The next speaker was Tim Beck from the roundtable last week, and I took away from Tim. He spoke specifically about the financial components of a business plan, and I took from Tim the opportunity he demonstrated for tools that Penn State Extension has for financial analysis, and he listed it in one specific slide, several Excel spreadsheets and some fillable PDF files that can do a lot of the financial analysis work that's needed to be done. I wouldn't go so far as saying that I believe every business plan has a financial component, but almost every business plan will have a financial component, because almost everything you can think of, everything we're going to do, we have to ask the question, how's this going to benefit the business financially? How's this going to change profitability or things like that? One of the key tools that he mentioned was the farm finance scorecard, and I really like that scorecard. It's a very good representation of 21 of our key financial indicators that we track on a regular basis, and that scorecard allows you to complete that for your own business for the year. And it also includes, if you download that scorecard, it has a great section. It defines all of those economic or financial measures, and then it provides the equation for calculating those. So it's a very informative file or a piece of information that's useful for the farm to monitor from year to year, and you can gauge your performance, financial performance, by using that scorecard. Very handy. Tim talked about financial analysis and projections. As I said, most business plans are going to have some kind of an aspect of analysis or projections forward. How's this going to change profit? How do we expect that? And for myself, I look at, when I'm analyzing an operation or a business, three primary indicators that I want to know are what's happening with net worth or equity change. Is the equity of the business growing? Is it retracting? And if so, what are the circumstances behind that? I want to know if the farm made a profit, and that's measured by net income. And we want that net income or that profitability to be an accrual-based number, but we also want that profit to come from earnings, not from valuations. So for example, at the end of 2020, when we saw corn prices going up, and if we had corn in storage, are we going to value that? Is corn going to be marketed, or is that corn going to be fed? How are we valuing that? Because that could have a big impact on the profitability of the year from an accrual standpoint. So we want to be careful that our profits are coming from earnings, not from necessarily valuations. So that's number two. And then finally, the third one is cash flow. Do we have residual cash? Did the farm cash flow for the year? And again, Tim provided a lot of really good resources and tools to use for farm businesses to do some of those financial analysis items. Then Virginia Ishler talked some specifics about production performance. And I think when we look at business evaluation and planning and analysis, many times it comes back to the production performance. And are things being measured? Is the farm being able to monitor those things? Is there a system in place that on a regular basis items are being looked at and evaluated, and those metrics are being tracked and followed? She talked about how we compare to benchmarks and put up some specific benchmarks related to the first 40 days in milk and some things like that. And just excellent information that can be applied to some specific areas of a business plan. And if we find problems, a lot of times our business planning is about mitigating some of those problems. Who's going to do what, and when are we going to do it? Are key sections or objectives of a business plan that is working towards mitigating a problem that we've identified on our farm businesses. Then Cassie Yost talked about heifer raising, and so she asked the question, are you raising too many heifers? Presented a lot of information about the heifer worksheets and the Penn State Herd Metrics app. I've used that in a few situations, thought that was very useful, was very eye-opening to the dairy producers I've used it with. So I'd encourage you to use that and keep that in your arsenal of working with farms to calculate how many heifers do they really need. And I appreciated her point she made about DHIA data, and the reason that the garbage can is there, that if we have garbage in, we get garbage out. And I can't emphasize enough, I'm a stickler for detail and records, that if we don't have good records, we can't make good decisions. And so I appreciated Cassie, mentioning that. And then she was talking specifically about heifers in her talk, and one that I'm sorry to say I keep seeing pop up all too often is finding that the age of first calving is too high on many of our dairy farms, or at least some of the ones I'm working with. And we're still seeing farms with 27, 28 months of age at first calving. And so we've known for a long time that that's less than ideal. Some room to grow for some of these farms to do that. It's an identifier that there's something not right in the replacement program when our heifers are too old when they hit the milking string. And then Zach talked about the types of risk and the different types of risk that farmers face and deal with every day. And I think farmers are some of the best risk managers out there. When you think about, okay, it may not be necessarily that they're doing risk management with markets, but on a daily basis, they're eliminating risks on their dairy farm. Maybe it's a health risk that's, a problem or something like that, but they're mitigating and reducing risk many times. And that's oftentimes what business plans are all about. It's a key component of a business plan, that we're mitigating or trying to reduce risks that we've identified on the farm and with the business, to improve performance and improve that achievement. Samantha talked about transition business succession, and she had the unenviable task of talking about something that is an all-day meeting session in about 20 minutes. And but she did a great job of talking about things, and The one that got me, I kind of fell into the trap when she put up a poll question about when should we start uh, getting the next generation involved. And I was thinking, the sooner the better. So as soon as they come back to the farm, but her point about let's let them do some other things in life or be sure that the farm is where they want to be, uh, made me step back and say, yeah, that's exactly right, that we want them to be sure they're there. But it's really never too early to start a succession planning process. And it does take a team. She emphasized the need for a team of advisors to bring different expertise to the table because there's so much involved in that succession planning. And I agree completely that when you've got tax situations to be concerned about, you've got legal documents that need to be prepared. So there are specific professionals that need to be in place and on that team. My take on succession planning is that poor succession planning is very costly. When you think about the potential for capital gains tax, transfer tax, the erosion of basis in the decisions that are made, sometimes farms have jumped the gun and made a decision and done something that cost them significantly in capital gains tax that if they'd have done it a slightly different way, could have saved a significant amount of money. Certainly the amount of money that it would have cost to have a team of professionals help them with a plan. So I wanted to talk a little bit today, just devote one slide here to how or where do business plans fail? What are the situations where they just didn't work or didn't accomplish anything? And the first one obviously would be if we have an incomplete business plan. We set out to do something and just kind of got bogged down and we didn't have a good leader or no leader at all and things just didn't materialize. And we see that happening in all too often, particularly this time of year as field work kicks in and things get going. Farmers aren't interested in sitting around a table and talking about business planning. They're interested in being out there getting the business done. So having an incomplete business plan certainly is going to be a failure. A business plan that is left on the shelf, on all too often, we'd have to blow the dust off of a business plan to take a look at it sometimes. And so business plans can fail because we just don't look at them. We don't review them. That leads to the next one, that there's no follow up or follow through on our business planning. We didn't establish or didn't create any SMART goals that can give us some benchmarks to uh, or achievements to reach for. And if we didn't create any SMART goals, then likely we don't have any action plans in place to achieve those SMART goals. And maybe there was no one that was necessary or no one was there to crack the whip and keep people on task completing that business plan. And that's one of the key aspects the advisors can bring to the table is the uh, being the whip cracker, if you will. And then finally, how do business plans fail? We don't do any evaluation. We don't do any revision. We don't look at it again. Did we accomplish what we wanted to? If not, what can we do differently to get it the next round or the next year? Or expand on a business plan to say, hey, we tackled one thing. Now, what's the next item up that needs to be addressed? Things like that. But we don't evaluate and we don't revise business plans. That's where they can fail us. So what are keys to successful business planning? And I just happened to put at the top to get some help and uh, to allow people that have experienced business planning can keep the team moving forward, can keep the process going and is focused. That's where having somebody to help you with that process is critical or is key. Establish clear goals and objectives. Talk about the core values of your business and what are the things that really drive what we do or what you do on your businesses. Think about why it is you do what you do and what's important to the families and to the business that's involved. Look at short and long-term goals. Where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? And establish those goals. I wish we could be here. I wish we could do this. Uh, Identify the objectives of what that business plan is going to accomplish. and make sure that that business plan aligns with those three, that it meets or addresses our core values, or it doesn't violate any of our core values, that we've identified the short and long-term goals and the objectives, and that this business plan is going to work towards accomplishing those that we've identified. Third key would be to identify the necessary components of a business plan. What segments are we going to need? And this is where the advisors can be helpful in identifying, will there be a financial component to this? Will there be a legal component to this? Do we have some documents that have to be prepared? What other aspects of this business plan need to be completed, and who's going to be able to do those? Include the whole team, get the family members involved, the management team at the farm involved at some level, have some buy-in from multiple people that are going to be affected by the outcomes of this business plan. Have that get their input. They can be the ones that most helpful to identify some of those goals and objectives. The financial evaluation and analysis. As I said, almost every business plan is going to have some aspect of financial evaluation and analysis. Do we have good records to provide that information, or is there going to be some work needed to be done there? How about making projections forward? What's our best estimate of where we're going to be in the next years? How much are we going to be investing capital-wise on these items and things like that? So it needs to be some detail from a financial standpoint about us with every business, almost every business plan. SMART goals and action plans. Let's identify some of those SMART goals that are specific, measurable, etc., and be able to put some action plans in place to get that done. How are we going to accomplish the portions of that business plan as well as the plan altogether as we go through the operations of carrying out that business plan? And then evaluate and revise and update that plan depending on the length of the terms of the business plan. It might have been a 2-year project. At the end of that 2 years, we review that plan, we revise it, we move forward and continue on. It's not an end all when something's done. We want to keep looking at that, and how do we make things better? How do we grow on what was accomplished and move forward? And then one I'll share from a pastor from long ago about life, and he always made the comment, "Don't sweat the small stuff." I always was wondering, well, what does he mean by the small stuff? And his point was to break things down into the small stuff. So that if you take a massive task and you break it down into smaller pieces, then you can accomplish those pieces easier, and you don't have to necessarily sweat the small stuff. Kind of as one person said one time, well, how do you eat the beer barrel belly buster at Denny's Pub in Clearfield? If you've ever been to this place, you'll know that this is just an example of one of their big burgers they have. It's only 15 pounds. But how do you eat one of those belly busters? Well, it's simply one bite at a time. And we take our approach to business planning, a huge project is one bite at a time. And remember that everything is small stuff. Break it down into the small pieces, accomplish each small piece. And with that, Zach, I don't know what our time frame ended up being, but I'd be glad to entertain any questions. Hope that was of help to somebody, or might be in the future.
Thanks, Phil. We're right at 12:30, so there's plenty of time for questions and answers. I jotted down a couple as you're going through. If there's nothing in the chat box at this moment, but if you want to ask a question, you can type it there in the chat box and send it, and have Phil answer that. Or if you want to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and do that. While you're thinking of questions, I'll go ahead and get us started with one. And early on, Phil, in your presentation, you talked about benchmarks. When you're writing a business plan or looking at something like this, what benchmarks do you place the most importance in? What do you advise people to really? This is a benchmark that you really need to know.
I look for benchmark opportunities in the industry specific to dairy. We are fortunate that we have some dairy benchmarks out there at our disposal. So we can calculate, for example, the financial key indicators for a dairy farm for a given year. And then we have some various sources out there. I'd say that the University of Minnesota FinPac system with its FinBin is one of those. Um, Through AgChoice, we have a couple of other options to compare to. And then I like to compare those numbers specifically and show producers, here's how your numbers over the last given history or given year stack up with some other producers in that that are similar to those farms. Specifically with FinBin, for example, you can change the herd size or put a range of cow numbers in there. So you're not comparing a 75 cow dairy in Pennsylvania to some multi-thousand cow herds in other states and other places. DHIA records, there is a dairy metrics opportunity to benchmark the latest test day for a given herd with like farms, similar size, similar breed, and see how they stack up with several indicators of DHIA performance. And so I like to share those with producers to give them an idea that this is to find where the holes might be or where problems may exist. Say there's some things that you can do to improve that performance there.
Thanks. We've got one question in the chat box from Charlie. He asked mentioned some lenders like to look at working capital per cow. Do you have a guideline for what this should be?
We've been in the neighborhood of $1,000 of working capital per cow with our farms, with our benchmarks. So are we going to be a goal?
Thanks, Charlie, for that question. If there are any other questions, yeah, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. I have another one here to continue. Well, of course, my job title is risk education manager, so I work a lot on a daily basis in risk management and helping folks understand what options are available to them. And you, of course, mentioned this in your presentation. How much importance do you put on developing a risk management plan as a strategy for that business plan? What do you advise the clients that you work with on risk? How do you advise clients on risk management when you're working through a business plan?
I would first make a risk management professional as part of that team, if that's particularly if it's identified as one of those areas that could benefit the farm. And then we would ask somebody that has more expertise and more training to participate in that somehow. Maybe it's a specific option to look at what's the potential for that farm to benefit by various programs that are available out there. Is it dairy revenue protection? Is it DMC? Things like that. Some of those we go over with dairy producers to say, are they enrolled? What are the reasons they've chosen not to if they're not enrolled, and things like that, and discuss those as well. But always want to bring to the table the opportunities that do exist for those programs and risk management decisions that can be made and can be helpful.
Yeah, I know you're probably aware of the 2020 dairy producer survey we did last summer, but one of the things we learned in that survey was that only 29% of the dairy farms, at least 29% of the respondents of that survey program used any kind of milk price risk management, and I think it was less than 25% used some on the crop side. So we still, in Pennsylvania, we have a lot of work to do in getting the risk management message out there and making sure that dairy farmers here in the state understand that there are options for them to mitigate some of these issues that we've experienced over the last several years with volatile markets. Another question I have, and again, if you have any other questions, please put them in the chat box. You mentioned advisors several times, and you mentioned having a risk management advisor in answering the last question. But what advisors do you recommend when someone's putting together some kind of advisory team, profit team, or transformation team, transition team, something like that? What types of people do you recommend being on an advisory team on a dairy farm?
My recommendations would be based on what's the goal and objective of the reason that we're pulling this team together. And so if it's production management related, certainly we're going to include crop advisor, veterinarian, nutritionist, things like that. If it's slanted toward some of the production areas, if it's more financial, if it's transition or succession, that would change necessarily who we might have involved. So then you're going to bring in the accountant, person that's working with the taxes, financial consultants or estate planners. Certainly attorneys are a big key in transition and succession planning. So to me, it depends a little bit on the project at hand and who are going to be the best team members to include and participate in that. And we often find, a longer range project, we may need an expertise on one specific goal or objective, and that can be handled in one particular setting or one shortened time frame. That we might need we might need a lease agreement written up by an attorney, and so that's their piece of the pie for that particular business plan or that project.
Thanks, Phil. I'm not seeing, that's the questions I had written down while you were talking, and there's nothing else in the chat box. Does anyone want to unmute themselves and ask any questions before we end today's Protecting Your Profits webinar? Well, if there's any last minute questions, be thinking about that, Phil. Do you have any last minute comments that you'd like to make?
Nothing other than to say thank you for the center for what you guys do for the dairy producers in Pennsylvania. You're a big help to them in getting some things done that they might not otherwise be doing on their businesses or with their businesses. So we appreciate you guys and thank you for what you do.
Well, thank you, Phil, and we couldn't do what we did without the support of companies like AgChoice, Farm Credit, and others throughout the state to help to partner with and do things like today's webinar, for instance. So, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your comments. It was a good follow-up to last week's roundtable. If you did not see last week's roundtable, that is available. I emailed out the link. I guess it was Friday in my weekly update, so you should have gotten that. If you did not, please contact me and I can send that link to you again. And also, the recording of this will be available later on today. I'll send the link out for it if there's something you'd like to go back and review, or please forward it to anyone that you think would be interested in it and help reach people and get this business planning idea out there and hopefully get more people interested in doing that and seeing the importance in it. So with that, just a couple announcements. The next Protecting Your Profits webinar will be a more normal webinar with me going over the next month. It'll be this month's USDA reports and anything happening in risk management, providing you an update on that. And with today's guest speaker, Phil, being here with us, of course, we didn't have our normal PYP, but tomorrow, Emily and I will be recording our Protecting Your Profits podcast, and in which I plan on reviewing that information in that podcast. So if you want that information, be on the lookout for the link for that I'll send out. And also you can subscribe to the Protecting Your Profits podcast on Spotify, Amazon Music, or Apple Podcasts. So those options are available in addition to our webpage. And with that, we'll conclude today's webinar. Again, thank you, Phil, for being here to talk with us. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we'll look forward to talking with you again next month.